Hey folks, PV again from Austin, Texas. Still warm out there, and today I just wanted to touch about uh, this whole thing about full frame. And I've used all kinds. I've used micro four third cameras. I've used APS-C. I've used actually APS-H. There was this 1.3 crop factor, 1D Mark IV. The Canon was a 1.3 crop factor, and then obviously you have full frame. But but what is this full frame? I mean, why the word full before the frame? So I know it evolved over a period, and 35 mm was the standard, and so on and so forth. But I think a lot of people aspire to kind of own full frame, and I think the thought process is, unless I don't own full frame, I won't get good pictures, which is not the case, as we all know. Yes, ISO performance slightly is better in full frame, but all that means is you need better light, and you need to understand how to light your scene if ambient light is not enough, or you need to shoot in good ambient light and get pretty good pictures with the APS-C or even micro four third for that matter. I mean, I know professionals who use micro four third all the time. So just to kind of dwell upon this whole full frame, right? What is full frame, right? Now this is a 35 mm film, right? So this one frame you see here, this single frame, this is the size of your typical full frame sensor, right? The 35 mm sensor, so Sony A7R series, A7 series, or your Canon 5D series, the Nikon D850s, all these, the full frames are, have sensors of this size. But is that it? No, it is not. Now this is medium format film, right? So look at the, this is 6x6 of a Hasselblad, right? So this is the size. Now compare this to this. Okay, it's what? About approximately maybe 4 times the size of typical full frame, or the 35 mm. But if you thought that was that, here you go. This is 4x5 film, which is approximately, I don't know, 10, 12 times your 35 mm film size, right? So there's no end to this, and there is 8x10, which is 4 times the size of this, and then there is 24x24, which is 2 feet by 2 feet negative. So really, there's no end to this. I mean, it's all up to a manufacturer kind of wanting to make something much bigger, and you get film sheets that big, or you make sensors that big. Of course, if you make sensors that big, it's going to become costlier, and there's a whole technology challenge to it. So really, I think stop fretting about full frame and crop and stuff like that. Now, do you think crop factor exists only with digital? Actually, no. Let me show you. Now, this is a large format camera. This is the negative I was talking about, the 4x5 negative, right? So the picture basically is this big. The negative is this big, right? Now, you know what? I can actually shoot medium format film in this. How? Here you go. Here's an adapter, right, which I can push into this. Now, what about this? So this, if this is the size of the 4x5 film, the size of film you shoot is smaller in this, right? So essentially, when I put this inside this, obviously I'm not going to get a picture this big. I'm going to get a picture which is essentially cropped, right? So if this is the actual 4x5 size, so you see here, now this is what is the actual negative that this camera can click. But I can use roll film in this and click a smaller size. Crop factor, that's all it is. So what is crop factor really? Crop factor is nothing but your picture being cropped. So it's like taking a picture in a full frame and then just cropping the edges off, and that becomes your crop factor essentially. So what happens because of this? So if, let's say, I have a 200 mm lens, on my large format camera, and let's say this is, for argument's sake, let's assume this is a 1.5 crop factor, right? So that, or let's say it's a micro four third for ease of mathematics, right? So let's say this is a micro four third sensor, then that 200 mm essentially, because I'm cropping it, gives me a feel as if I've shot that image with a 400 mm. What has changed? Nothing has changed except for the fact that you have simply cropped the image. That's all has happened. So your 200 mm now appears to give an angle of view which is equivalent to a 400 mm, right? Now, there's a lot of question about depth of field, so on and so forth, and how does it impact your exposure and stuff like that. So let me tell you this: exposure does not get impacted at all. So let's say I put a lens on this camera, and then I take an exposure reading for a 4x5 shot, right? And then let's say I insert this. What is changing? Nothing is changing. If it's the same ISO film, let's say that was 400 ISO, this is also 400 ISO, the meter reading that I've taken from ambient light remains the same. So if you have a crop factor camera, if you have loaded a lens, or if you fixed a lens which you would have fixed on a full frame camera, and using the same aperture, same shutter speed, same ISO, the exposure has no change, number one. Two, depth of field. Again, if I'm using a 200 mm on that, and then I insert this, the depth of field is going to remain the same. If I'm shooting that at 1.4, let's say 200 f2 or 200 f2.8, and I just insert this, what is changing? Nothing is changing. Now, here is the difference though. If, remember I said that 200 mm is going to appear as if it's a 400 mm because I'm cropping. So now, let's say I put 100 mm on that camera so that it appears as if it's a 200 mm because I want 200 mm equivalent, then the depth of field changes. Because instead of a 200 mm lens, now you'll be using a 100 mm lens. Okay? Now what are the things that determine depth of field, right? And also the bokeh quality and stuff like that. So one is the focal length, one is the aperture you use, one is the subject to camera distance, right? So all these things impact your depth of field. So with the same lens, same setting, if you shoot on a full frame camera versus a APS-C camera or a micro four third camera, no DOF change, no change in exposure. But because you want to get the same angle of view, if you push the subject further away, or if you use a lesser focal length, or you change any of these settings, then obviously the depth of field changes. So hope that was helpful. So by the way, I am shooting. I've loaded some film onto this, and this is how it goes. And if you are wondering how this whole thing works, so this, if you see, is a spring back here. Okay, so this kind of comes all the way out, and I can insert this here. There you go. So that's how you insert this. So basically you focus, you take your reading, you do everything, and then this glass also has markings. I don't think it's very visible. Here's one mark, there's one mark here. So it also has marking on what is the frame of the smaller frame that I'm using. So you can frame your shot, you can take your exposure, everything, and then insert this, pull the dark slide out. I'm not pulling it because there's film inside. So if you pull it and then click, you're pretty much going to get the same picture cropped out, right? So that's all that is happening, and that's essentially the difference between your crop sensor and your full frame sensor. And by the way, when you hear full, don't get fooled. It's just a name that all these camera manufacturers gave to give a bit of an air of superiority to their product, but frames come in all kinds of sizes. You just have to be good enough to adapt yourself to use whatever sensor size you have to get good pictures. Thank you.